You have started this before. Not this exact thing, but something like it. A morning routine, a training habit, a practice you were serious about. You showed up for a while, then something slipped, then you were starting over. Maybe twice, maybe more. And every time you started again, you told yourself the same thing. This time is different. This time you have a better reason, a better system, more commitment. But here you are. Kyoto, 1920. A young samurai named Kenji walks into Ueshiba's dojo. It is his third dojo in 2 years. Third master, third fresh start. He trained hard at both previous dojos. He was not lazy. He was not unmotivated. Somewhere around the second month, both times, the consistency broke. The practice became occasional. Then it stopped. Ueshiba watches him bow. He has seen this before. Not a student, missing talent. Not missing motivation, and missing one specific thing that no amount of starting over can build. The samurai had a word for it. Kata, sing. Not a habit, not a system, not a streak. The transformation that turns what you do into what you are. This video is about that transformation, and why everything you have tried before has been missing it. Subscribe, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Student Who Kept Starting Over. Tokyo, 1920. Kenji is 23 years old. He has been training under Ueshiba for 4 months. He came to the dojo with serious intentions. He had trained briefly under 2 other masters before this. Both times he had started well, and then, somewhere around the second month, something had slipped. The consistency had frayed. He had found himself showing up less, then not at all, then starting over somewhere new. He tells himself it was the training style. The first master was too rigid, the second too unfocused. This time will be different. 4 months in, he can already feel the familiar loosening. The mornings when the practice feels less urgent, the sessions he shortens because he is tired, the small negotiations that he tells himself are reasonable. He goes to Ueshiba. "I am struggling with consistency," he says. "I train well for a period and then something breaks down. I want to understand what I am doing wrong." Ueshiba looks at him for a moment. "Tell me what happens when you miss a session." Kenji thinks, "I feel guilty. I plan to do double the next day to make up for it." "And do you?" "Sometimes, not always." "And when you do the double session, how does it feel?" "Like I am catching up, like I am paying a debt." Ueshiba nods slowly. "This is the problem," he says. "Not the missed session, your relationship to it." He stands. "You are training as though the practice is something you owe to an outcome. When you miss it, you are in debt. When you do it, you are paying down the debt. The practice is always in service of something outside itself." He looks at Kenji directly. "That relationship exhausts itself, always. The debt becomes too large, or the outcome becomes uncertain, and the motivation to pay disappears." He walks to the training floor. "I want to show you something different. Come back tomorrow at 5 in the morning, before the other students arrive." Kenji is there at 5. Ueshiba is already training, has been for some time. The forms are the same ones Kenji has been learning for 4 months. Slow, precise, complete. Each movement arriving and finishing before the next one begins. Kenji watches for 20 minutes before Ueshiba acknowledges him. "You have been watching," Ueshiba says. "What did you see?" "You were training alone. Before anyone arrived. Before anyone could see." "Yes." "Why?" Ueshiba's answer is simple. "Because this is what I am. Not what I do to become something, what I am. A man who trains in the morning. The training is not in service of anything outside itself. It is the expression of who I am. The E2. He pauses. "You have been trying to build a habit. I am trying to show you how to build an identity." Chapter 2. What Kata actually means. 3 days later, Kenji asks Ueshiba to explain kata. Not technically, fundamentally. Ueshiba is quiet for a long time before answering. Most people hear kata and think of the forms, the specific sequences of movement we practice. They are right, but they are seeing only the surface. He sits. Kata means form, but in the deepest sense it means the shape of a thing. the specific pattern that makes something what it is rather than something else. He looks at KENJI. Water has kata. It always finds the lowest point. It always takes the shape of its container. This is not a decision water makes. It is what water is, its form, its nature. He pauses. A man with genuine kata is the same. His behavior is not a decision he makes each morning. It is what he is, his form. The pattern that expresses itself consistently regardless of mood or circumstance, or how he feels about it on a given day. KENJI asks, how does behavior become nature? Ueshiba answers with a question. How did water become water? KENJI does not know how to answer. Through being water. Completely. Without exception. Every time. Not water when conditions are favorable. Not water when it feels like being water. Water, always. He stands. The behavior becomes identity through the same process. You do it completely, without exception, every time. Not because you feel like it, not because the outcome is visible, because this is what you are. And the repetition, sustained without gaps, eventually stops being repetition and becomes nature. He looks at KENJI. This takes longer than most people are willing to wait. This is why most people never have it. This is what separates kata from every modern approach to habit building. Think about what actually happens when you try to build a new habit. You find a reason, you make a plan, you start. For the first week, motivation carries you. The second week, it starts to cost something. By the third week, you are fighting yourself every morning. By the fourth week, there is a gap, and then another. The system was not wrong. The reason was not weak. The problem was that the behavior was still a decision. Every morning, it required the same negotiation between who you intend to be and who you are comfortable being. And negotiations can always go either way. Kata removes the negotiation, not by making the decision easier, by making the decision unnecessary. Water does not decide to flow downhill each morning. It flows because flowing downhill is its nature. The pattern is not a choice. It is what water is. KENJI had been trying to make better decisions. Ueshiba was offering him something different, the chance to become someone for whom the decision had already been made, years ago, and did not need to be made again. That requires something most people are not willing to give. Time, real time. Not the 4 weeks of a habit challenge, months, sometimes a year or more. The specific repetition, sustained without significant gaps, until the behavior has encoded itself deeply enough to begin running below the level of conscious decision. Most people stop before this point. They stop when the behavior is still costing willpower and conclude that they are not a disciplined person. They are not a disciplined person yet. There is a difference. KENJI had stopped twice before. Both times he had left before the transition completed. He had taken the behavior but left the identity still unformed. And an unformed identity cannot be carried to the next place. It has to be built in place. This was what Ueshiba was telling him. The place mattered. The time mattered. The specific repetitions in the specific context mattered. You could not shortcut the encoding. You could only stay in it long enough for it to complete. Chapter 3. Why willpower is the wrong tool. 2 weeks in, KENJI has been trying to apply what Ueshiba told him. He has been showing up more consistently. But he notices that the consistency is effortful. He is willing himself through the practices that feel difficult. Fighting the mornings when the bed is warmer than the training floor. He tells Ueshiba this. The consistency is there, he says, but it costs something every day. I am spending willpower each morning to get to the practice. Ueshiba looks at him. How much willpower does it cost you to eat breakfast? KENJI blinks. None. Why not? Because I am hungry. Because it is what I do in the morning. Because it has never occurred to me not to. Ueshiba nods. When does the training become like breakfast? KENJI thinks. When I stop thinking about whether to do it. Yes. And when does that happen? A pause. When it becomes who I am. Ueshiba sits. Willpower is a tool for the transition, not for the destination. You use willpower to get through the period before the identity has formed. The period when the behavior is still a decision rather than an expression. This period is always uncomfortable. It always costs something. He looks at KENJI. But the mistake most people make is believing that the willpower cost is permanent. That discipline will always feel like fighting yourself. They exhaust themselves in the transition and conclude that they are not disciplined people. He shakes his head. They are people who stopped before the transition completed. Willpower is the scaffolding. Identity is the building. You need the scaffolding to build. But you take it down when the building stands on its own. He pauses. The question is not how to make the transition easier. The transition is supposed to be hard. The question is how to stay in it long enough for the building to stand. This is the point where most approaches to habit building fail to go deep enough. Here is the honest truth about willpower that nobody wants to say. It runs out every day. The willpower you have at 7 in the morning is not the willpower you have at 7 in the evening. It gets used on decisions, on resistance, on the small negotiations that fill a day. By the time something genuinely hard arrives, the tank is often empty. This is not weakness. This is how it works for everyone. Building a practice entirely on willpower means rebuilding it every time the willpower runs low, which is why most practices built on willpower eventually fail. The goal is not to get better at using willpower. The goal is to need less of it. That happens through time and repetition. The behavior, practiced consistently enough, begins to shift from the part of the brain that requires conscious effort to the part that runs automatically. Not because you trained harder, because you repeated it enough times in the same context. Think about learning to drive. The first weeks required enormous conscious attention. Every gear change, every turn, every mirror check was a deliberate act, exhausting. Now, if you drive, almost none of it is conscious. The hands move before the thought. The body knows what to do. The training did not change. The repetition moved the behavior from conscious to automatic. Kata is this process applied deliberately to the behaviors that matter most. The willpower is the scaffolding. The automatic behavior is the building. You need the scaffolding to build. But the scaffolding is not the goal. The building is. And the building stands when you no longer need to decide to do the thing, when the form precedes the feeling, when the body moves toward the practice before the mind has had a chance to weigh the options. KENJI was starting to feel this. Barely, occasionally, but starting. Chapter 4. The form before the feeling. 1 month in. Something has shifted in KENJI's practice. Not dramatically. A morning where he showed up before he had decided to, where the body had moved toward the training floor before the mind had weighed the options. Just the movement, automatic, toward the form. He tells Ueshiba about it. This morning I was training before I had decided to train, he says. The decision happened after. Ueshiba's expression does not change, but something in his eyes does. Describe it. I woke up. I was moving toward the training clothes before I was fully awake. By the time the thought arrived, I was already dressed. Ueshiba is quiet for a moment. This is the form preceding the feeling, he says. The body has begun to know what it is before the mind has confirmed it. He stands. Most people wait for the feeling before they take the form. They wait to feel motivated before they train. They wait to feel focused before they work. They wait to feel ready before they begin. He looks at KENJI. The samurai understood this backwards. The form precedes the feeling. You take the form first. The feeling follows, sometimes immediately, sometimes not, until you are already deep in the practice. But it follows. He sits back down. What you experienced this morning is the beginning of Kata, the body beginning to know its form before the mind has given permission. This is what you are building. Not a habit that requires conscious decision each morning, a nature that expresses itself before consciousness has had a chance to intervene. He pauses. You are not there yet, but you can feel the direction. This is the specific experience that marks the transition from habit to identity, the behavior that happens before the decision rather than after it. The action that the body initiates before the mind has run its cost-benefit analysis. Most people have experienced this with negative behaviors. The phone picked up before the decision to pick it up. The snack eaten before the decision to eat. The behaviors that run on automatic are not always the ones we want. Kata is the practice of building this automaticity around the behaviors that matter. The training that begins before the mind has had a chance to object. The practice that runs not from decision, but from nature. Getting here requires the full transition. the weeks or months of willpower-based repetition until the behavior has been encoded deeply enough to begin running below the level of conscious decision. This encoding does not happen at any specific moment. It accumulates across hundreds of repetitions until one morning the body moves toward the practice before the mind has been consulted. That morning is not the end. It is the first confirmation that the building is standing. Ueshiba trained the same forms every morning for decades, not to become something, because it was what he was. If this is changing how you see your own consistency, like this video, one tap tells the algorithm, this matters. Now we continue. Chapter 5. What Kenji discovered 6 months later. 6 months after arriving at Ueshiba's dojo, Kenji has not missed a morning practice in 11 weeks. Not because he has been perfectly motivated, because he has stopped treating motivation as relevant. He shows up the mornings when he does not feel like it. He shows up the mornings when he is tired. He shows up the mornings when a reasonable excuse is available. Not because the excuse is not valid, because he has learned that the excuse, however valid, is not the point. The point is the form, and the form does not consult the excuse. He goes to Ueshiba on the morning of the 11th week. Something has changed, he says. Missing the practice now feels wrong, not guilty, wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. Ueshiba looks at him for a long time. Yes, he says, that feeling is the identity. The practice is no longer something you do. It has become part of what you are. And missing it feels like being someone else because briefly, it is being someone else. He pauses. This is what you could not build in the first 2 dojos, not because those masters were wrong, because you left before the transition completed. Every time you left, you took the willpower and the behavior with you. What you left behind was the identity. He looks at Kenji. Identity cannot be carried. It is built in place, in the specific repetitions, in the specific context, over the specific time. When you stop, you do not pause the building. You begin the dismantling. He is quiet for a moment. The man who has kata is not more gifted than the man who does not. He is more patient. He stayed in the transition long enough for the building to stand. The 5 kata practices. What follows is the practical application of what Ueshiba taught Kenji. 5 specific practices for building kata into daily life, each one addressing a different layer of the transition from habit to identity. Practice 1. The minimum viable form. Choose one behavior you want to become, specific and completable, something that takes between 5 and 20 minutes. Not the ambitious version, the minimum version, the version that is so small it is almost embarrassing. Not 30 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes, not an hour of writing, 1 paragraph, not a full training session, 10 minutes of movement. The point is simple. On the days when nothing is working, the minimum form can still happen. 5 minutes still counts. 1 paragraph still counts. 10 minutes of movement still counts. And it counts fully, not as a lesser version, as the complete expression of the identity on a hard day. This matters because kata is built through repetition without gap, not through impressive individual sessions. The 5-minute practice that happens every day is building identity faster than the 60-minute practice that happens 3 times a week. The minimum form is not the goal, it is the floor. On good days you will exceed it. On hard days it is what stands between the streak and the gap. Never let the minimum form be the reason to stop. If 5 minutes is all that is available, 5 minutes it is. The form continues. Practice 2. The context anchor. Kata is context dependent. The behavior does not exist in isolation. It exists in a specific context, a specific time, a specific place, a specific sequence. The context is part of the form. When you change the context, the form weakens. This is why travel breaks routines, why new environments disrupt consistency. The behavior was anchored to a context that no longer exists. The practice is to build the anchor deliberately. Same time, same place, same sequence leading into the behavior, every time. Not because variety is bad, because the context is part of what triggers the identity. The morning sequence that leads to the practice is itself part of the kata. The body learns, when this sequence happens, this behavior follows. The sequence triggers the behavior before motivation has been consulted. Define the context precisely, the exact time, the exact location, the 2 or 3 things that happen immediately before. Build them as a sequence that does not vary. After enough repetitions, the context itself becomes the trigger. The morning sequence begins, and the behavior has already started before any decision has been made. This is context-dependent automaticity. It is how the samurai's morning practice ran for decades without requiring daily motivation. The context was the same. The form followed the context. The identity followed the form. Practice 3. The identity statement. This one feels strange at first. Do it anyway. Once a week, write 1 sentence. Present tense. First person. Describing not what you do, but what you are. Not, I am trying to meditate daily. I am someone who meditates every morning. Not, I want to train consistently. I am someone who trains before anything else. Not, I am building a writing practice. I am a writer who writes every day. The grammar matters, not aspiration. Statement of current identity. The statement will feel dishonest at first if the behavior is not yet fully consistent. Write it anyway, not as a lie but as a declaration of direction. You are not claiming arrival. You are naming the identity you are in the process of building. The act of naming the identity changes the relationship to the behavior. When you miss the practice, you are not a person who failed to complete a task. You are a person who did not act like themselves that day. That is harder to dismiss. Write the statement. Read it before the practice. 1 sentence. Present tense. What you are, rather than what you are trying to do. Practice 4. The continuity rule. This is the practice that closes the gap that breaks most people. When you miss the practice, the rule is simple. Never miss twice. Not because 1 missed day is catastrophic. It is not. Because the pattern of missed days is. 2 missed days in a row is the beginning of a gap. The gap is where the identity dismantles. The continuity rule removes the option of the second miss, not the first. People miss. Life interrupts. The first miss is human. The second miss is a choice. When you miss, the next day is non-negotiable. Not the enhanced version to make up for the miss. Not double to pay the debt. The regular form. 1 day after the miss, without drama, without punishment, without the weight of having failed. The miss happened. The form continues. Ueshiba did not teach Kenji to be perfect. He taught him to continue. Perfection is not the point. The unbroken line of continuation is the point. The continuity rule makes the unbroken line achievable even through imperfect reality. You will miss sometimes. You will not miss twice in a row. The identity is built not through perfect streaks, but through honest continuation after imperfection. Practice 5. The form, audit. Once a month, 30 minutes, 1 question. Is the behavior I am practicing daily becoming more like breathing or more like lifting? Breathing means it is starting to run on its own. You do it before you decide to. Lifting means it still costs the same effort every day. You still have to push. If it feels more like breathing, keep going. Something is forming. If after 3 months it still feels like lifting every single day, something in the structure needs to change. Not the commitment, the structure. Maybe the time is inconsistent. Maybe the minimum form is still too big. Maybe the context keeps shifting. Kenji discovered this in his 4th month. He was practicing at different times depending on the day. No consistent anchor. The identity could not form around something that kept moving. He fixed the time. Within weeks, the automaticity started to arrive. The audit is not about judging yourself. It is about seeing honestly what is happening across months rather than days. Once a month, 30 minutes, breathing or lifting. That is the entire practice. What this means for you. You already know what you should be doing. The knowing was never the problem. The problem was the relationship between the knowing and the doing. Specifically, the fact that the doing kept requiring the same decision every day, the same consultation with motivation, the same cost-benefit calculation, the same fight between who you intend to be and who the morning finds you as. Kata solves this at the root, not by making the decision easier, by making the decision unnecessary. The 5 practices in this video are the specific structure for building that transition. The minimum viable form removes size as the reason not to do it. The context anchor builds the trigger that precedes motivation. The identity statement names the direction clearly enough to feel the gap when you deviate from it. The continuity rule closes the gap before it becomes a pattern. The form audit tracks the progress of the transition honestly across months. None of these are complicated. All of them require time. The transition takes longer than most people are willing to wait. This is why Kata is rare, not because it is difficult, because it is patient. Ueshiba trained the same forms for decades. He was not unusually motivated. He was unusually patient with the transition. He stayed in it until the building stood. The building stands when the practice feels like breathing, when the morning without it feels like being someone else, when the question of whether to do it has stopped arising because the answer is already embedded in what you are. That is Kata. Not a habit system, an identity. Yours is waiting for you to stay long enough to build it. Ueshiba Morihei died in 1969 at the age of 85. He had been training the same forms every morning for most of his adult life, not because he needed the practice, because the practice was the expression of who he was. A man whose form was inseparable from his nature, whose behavior did not require motivation because it had become identity. He had been a frail child, a small man. He had none of the natural gifts that people associate with greatness in martial arts. What he had was Kata, the daily repetition of form so complete and so consistent that the form eventually became the man. The behavior that had started as willpower-dependent effort and ended as effortless expression. The identity built not through talent but through the patient accumulation of ordinary mornings. That accumulation is available to you, not through a new system or a better app or a stronger reason why, through the patient practice of form, the minimum version, every day, in the same context, named as identity, continued through imperfection, audited honestly across months. The transition is hard. It is supposed to be. It requires willpower. It requires patience. It requires you to stay when the building is still scaffolding and does not yet look like it will stand. But it stands. Ueshiba's stood for 80 years. Yours can stand too. One morning at a time. Comment below. The form is who I am. Subscribe to Presence and Purpose for ancient wisdom, tested by time and confirmed by science. New video every week. Ueshiba did not have extraordinary talent. He had extraordinary kata. The difference between who you are and who you intend to be is built one morning at a time. Start tomorrow. Actually, start today.